Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful. My name is Ibrahim Hooper. I'm National Communications Director for CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations in Washington, D.C. We'll try and keep this fairly brief this morning. We're doing an update on the situation that you all know about in our Ohio chapter. First, we'll have an update and new details from our National Deputy Director, Edward Ahmed Mitchell. And then we'll have some other additional information and background from our attorney, Lena Masri, and then we'll take some questions. First, we'll hear from Edward Ahmed Mitchell, our National Deputy Director.
Thank you, Ibrahim, and good morning, everyone. I hope all of you are doing well and staying safe. Thank you for joining us. Again, I'm Edward Ahmed Mitchell. I'm an attorney and the National Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. I'll be speaking today alongside Lena Masri, our legal and advocacy director, and also our general counsel. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So let me start by just reviewing what has happened. I think all of you know, that's why you're here, but I'll just briefly review. Number one, last year we received information indicating the possibility of a mole acting somewhere within the CAIR organization. Over subsequent months, we received additional information which revealed that an anti-Muslim hate group had been systematically attempting to spy on the Muslim community for years, targeting mosques, organizations, attempting to find out what was going on inside our community. This anti-Muslim hate group had been doing this for years. They had targeted multiple organizations, and we were able to, thank God, learn about this and take action. You're going to hear today about what we did, how we handled it, what we know about this hate group. We're going to show you some visual evidence that has not been released publicly yet, and then we will take your questions, God willing. So let me start with a bit of timeline. So again, late last year is when we first found out that there might be a problem, that a hate group might be infiltrating and spying upon the Muslim community. At the very beginning, we did not have definitive proof. We needed to do more investigation. We needed to look more into the information, and information was continuing to come to us. This was a multi-month process of gathering, receiving, and reviewing information. It became evident after some months that, number one, this hate group was indeed targeting the Muslim community. Number two, that they had somehow gotten were using and getting information from a spy within a local CAIR chapter, and that they were also had moles targeting other Muslim organizations. We did not know who the mole within CAIR was. That was unclear. It was just evident that there was likely a mole, and we were trying to figure out who that might be. Earlier this year, around springtime, we finally got a name, the name of Roman Iqbal of CAIR Columbus. At that point, we hired an outside law firm and a forensic investigator to dive into the evidence we'd collected and try to determine the truth. Was the evidence we had real? Was there more evidence to find? Lena is going to give you more detail about that, but suffice it to say, that investigator did an amazing job, collected an amazing amount of information, confirmed it to be true, and we obviously took action by alerting the CAIR Ohio Board of Directors about this, and the CAIR Ohio then terminated Roman Iqbal. That, though, is just one part of the story, this spying attack by Roman Iqbal. The bigger issue here, and the thing that's concerning to us, is this hate group was targeting multiple Muslim organizations. This hate group was engaging in communication collaboration with a foreign government. We know a lot, and yet we still don't know everything they were doing. There are still many unanswered questions, and we are very concerned about what else this hate group might be doing in our country that we don't know about. So with that, we're going to share with you a bit of information, show you a bit of visuals, and then I'll turn over to Lena, and then we'll take your questions, God willing. So in our statement that we released the other day, we made 4 public allegations. Number one, we allege that Roman Iqbal of CAIR Ohio was acting as a spy and providing private information about CAIR's work to an anti-Muslim hate group. Number two, we allege that Stephen Emerson and the Investigative Project for Terrorism was the hate group involved in this plot. Number three, we allege that Mr. Emerson was abusing, threatening, and otherwise mistreating his staff because he felt that they were not producing enough Islamophobic content. Number 4, we allege that he, Mr. Emerson, and IPT were collaborating and communicating with Israeli intelligence officials in the office of then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We allege these things publicly. We put it out there in our own name. In response, Mr. Emerson has not denied these allegations. In fact, the only statement he's released to our knowledge was a boilerplate statement attacking CAIR and using Islamophobic language. But he has not denied anything we said, and that is telling. Neither has Mr. Iqbal, and that is because everything we've said is true. This all happened. I will note that this was shocking to us, but it's not truly surprising. Civil rights groups have been targeted and infiltrated for decades, going back to Malcolm X, Dr. King, the NAACP, SNCC, anti-apartheid activists in the 1980s. This has happened over and over again. When organizations are advocating for justice and doing good, you can't stop them. And so what you try to do is find out what they're doing and you try to undermine them. That is what IPT and Mr. Emerson were trying to do, and they failed. We have uncovered their plot, and we are taking all actions possible to make sure that they can never do this to another Muslim organization in this country. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and show you a bit of information that will confirm what I just told you. Give me a moment.
And while he's doing that, I just learned that we'll also be joined by our National Executive Director, Nihad Awad, after Brother Edward offers his presentation.
All right, can everyone see my screen? Or let me put it, can anyone not see my screen? Okay, everyone can see this. You should see an image here saying sample of evidence. Okay, very well. So the evidence that we have received is extensive. We're talking maybe hundreds of files, including emails, audio recordings, documents. We are just going to show you about 5 items that we've received that we think give an overview of some of what we have. But there's much, much more than this that we received. So this is a sampling of evidence. So the first thing we want to talk about is the way IPT allegedly treats their staff members, this abusive behavior that we were alerted to. The evidence indicated the following. This is one example. This is an email that Stephen Emerson, the leader and founder of the Investigative Project for Terrorism, sent to his own staff. The subject line of this email is, to all those F-U-C-K-I-N-G, to all those effing idiots who work for me. He is expressing fury because his staff did not record something or surveil something that he wanted to be surveilled that was happening at Georgetown University. If you read this, and we're going to provide this to you as well, a file, so you don't have to rush. We're going to give this to you, but you'll see there, he says things like, for example, yesterday in an effing email, CNN, C-SPAN should be checked for the symposium because of the likelihood it will be broadcast. You, ASS, you asses did not check, and thus did not videotape the event as I told you to do so. You were just too effing lazy. I will not tolerate this again. If you think I'm blowing smoke, I'm going to fire one staffer next week who is not pulling their weight. It goes on and on. This F-up was the last because 80% of you will be let go by December. I'm disgusted by your laziness and your sense of entitlement. I know who the 4 staffers who will stay. This sort of behavior, this profane, abusive treatment of his staff, again, is not unusual. This is just one example. And this is important and relevant because even though we cannot tell you exactly how we received this information, it is very clear that Mr. Emerson's own staff, after experiencing abuse, after experiencing mistreatment, decided they had enough and decided to share the truth about this organization. And so that has been a key moment here. His abuse of staff is in some ways what has led to his downfall. Another example of the alleged treatment of staff. This is another one that Mr. Emerson, that's his personal email there, that he sent to his staff. See the attached email from blanked out below. Assuming you read my previous email about the MANA F-up, I'm going to fire the person responsible for screwing this up. You can read this here. So again, this is how he speaks to his staff. This is how he communicates to his people when they do not live up to his expectations. I would also note that we have audio recordings of similar behavior, voicemails that he left that are incredibly profane that we're not going to play just out of a sense of tact. But this is the way that this organization operates internally. This is the way that he treats his staff. And again, this is likely what has led in some ways to his downfall. Now, next, I would like to show you some of the interactions between Roman Iqbal of CAIR, Ohio, and IPT, and interactions about them. So as we noted, this was going on for years. Roman Iqbal, while he was serving the CAIR Columbus chapter, was simultaneously sharing information about CAIR's strategic planning, our advocacy work with this anti-Muslim hate group. This email dates back to 2008, over 10 years ago. This is an email that, according to the evidence we have, that Roman Iqbal sent to Stephen Emerson, letting him know that CAIR was, like any civil rights organization, encouraging members of the Judiciary Committee to ask certain questions at a hearing that was coming up. Roman Iqbal reached out to Stephen Emerson and gave him a heads up about this, let him know that we were planning to encourage members of the House Committee to ask questions of the Bureau during an upcoming hearing. You can see here this direct communication from Roman to Stephen Emerson. And again, this is from 2008. This is over 10 years ago. This is how long this behavior was ongoing. Now, the one thing I want to add about this, and this is the ironic thing about the situation, is that these individuals, this hate group, was spying on us and other members of the Muslim community for years and never found anything damaging. The only thing that they found was typical civil rights and advocacy work. That's the great irony of this situation. They were spying on us, and all they found was good, positive work. Nothing that they took from us has been used to harm us, because there's nothing harmful there. Let's continue. This is an internal interaction between the IPT staff about Roman. You see here Mr. Emerson communicating with one of his staffers saying, Roman is covering this event for us, so be prepared for an avalanche of incoming tapes during that period. And this event was an event that our New York chapter was holding, an advocacy day on Capitol Hill. It appears that Mr. Roman gave Steve Emerson a heads up about this upcoming event and was planning to record parts of that event for Stephen Emerson. So again, you see here this direct communication about what Roman Iqbal was doing for Steve Emerson. Next, you see here another internal interaction among the IPT staffers, where an IPT staffer identified here informed Stephen Emerson, the 3 large audio files have been sent by Roman, and I now have them. I've given them to another staffer, and he said he will line up people to begin immediate transcription. And this is what Mr. Iqbal would do. He would record things and then provide the recordings to IPT, and then IPT would transcribe them. They'd write these very detailed transcripts of what was said in those audio conversations. Here's another example. In this example, a member of our CAIR Michigan staff had a routine meeting with a member of the Department of Homeland Security. Roman Iqbal informed Stephen Emerson about this, let him know this event was held last night. You can see the interaction here. Roman forwards an email. Mr. Emerson asks Roman, when did this happen? And Roman tells him it was held last night. Again, typical civil rights work, but this shows you what Mr. Iqbal was doing, that anything was related to national advocacy, he was trying to share with Mr. Emerson, strategic planning, policy work, etc. Now I'd like to move on and discuss, share a few examples of IPT's collaboration with the Israeli government. This is perhaps the most concerning thing that we learned about, that this organization was providing assistance to the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership, and also was responding to requests for help from the Israeli government. What you're going to see here momentarily is one example where the Israeli government asked Stephen Emerson for information about an American student college group and whether or not this group had any connections to Hamas. You're going to see Mr. Emerson noting that he had been in Tel Aviv meeting with an Israeli intelligence official by the name of Yossi Kusperman. You're going to see Mr. Emerson sending an email to his staff saying, we have an urgent research request from the office of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Clear evidence of collaboration with a foreign government to apparently in some cases at least, target American citizens. So this is one of those emails. This is an email from Stephen Emerson to Yossi Kuperwasser. If you look up Mr. Kuperwasser's name on Google, you'll find he is an Israeli intelligence official, a former Israeli general. And you'll see here in this email, Mr. Emerson asks Mr. Kuperwasser for information about a Palestinian woman and whether or not she has any history of engaging in violent activity. In this email, Mr. Emerson also notes that he and Mr. Kuperwasser had met in Tel Aviv about a year prior to this email, and that during that meeting, Mr. Emerson allegedly informed Mr. Kuperwasser about a person in America, a lawful permanent resident, who was facing deportation. And apparently this is something that they were collaborating with to ensure that deportation happened. Most interestingly, you can see here at the bottom of this email, the standard language from the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister's office has scanned this email for viruses and malicious content. That is the Prime Minister's office, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was Prime Minister at the time of Israel. Going to the next one. Here you see Mr. Emerson communicating with an individual named Ido, who worked for Mr. Kuperwasser, allegedly. And so he was acting as the intermediary, sharing information back and forth between Mr. Kuperwasser and Mr. Emerson. What's interesting here is Ido Mizrahi. If you look at the bottom there, you'll see the label, his title in the Israeli government, Senior Intelligence Coordinator, PMO, the Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. So again, these are the people that Stephen Emerson was communicating with, official Israeli intelligence officials in the Israeli government, providing information and getting information. We'll go to the next one. Here is where Ido from the Israeli Prime Minister's office asked Stephen Emerson about Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a college group, a college student group that is on many college campuses that advocates for Palestinian human rights. You'll see here the Israeli government is asking Mr. Emerson about whether or not he has information linking SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, this American college group, to Hamas, the foreign organization. And Mr. Emerson does reply to this email. You'll also see here the subject line. This is Stephen Emerson. How are you? I have a favor to ask you. Again, back and forth, requesting help, receiving help. And the last one we will show you here is when the Israeli government reaches out to Steve Emerson and asks him to perform research, not even on anything in America, but on a foreign issue. He's asking an American nonprofit organization, a registered nonprofit organization, to conduct research into whether Hamas and Boko Haram have any ties together in terms of their ideology. And then Mr. Emerson forwards this message, as you can see, to his staff, saying urgent research request from Netanyahu office. This is an urgent high priority research request from the office of PM Netanyahu. Who can work on this right now? This is urgent, Steve. So again, this is clear evidence of Mr. Emerson providing assistance to the Israeli government and asking his staff to provide assistance to the Israeli government. Now, of course, this all raises a question. Does this break the law? Obviously, in America, you know, if you're operating as an agent for a foreign government, that raises all sorts of interesting legal questions. That is not for us to say. That's for law enforcement to investigate and figure out and take action if appropriate. But the unanswered questions that we really need to have answered are, number one, what was Stephen Emerson doing with all the information he was taking from Muslim community organizations? Was he providing it to foreign governments? And if so, what were those foreign governments doing with that information? Number two, Mr. Emerson was actively not only receiving recorded materials, he was providing, allegedly, recording equipment that would allow his staff to secretly record conversations, including in one instance, a purse with a hidden camera in it. And so when you're acting as such a clear accessory to this behavior, does that violate any state laws that forbid people from recording conversations without permission? Again, that is not for us to determine. That is for law enforcement to investigate and figure out. And also would encourage journalists to look into this as well and try to find the truth. Again, the thing I want to emphasize here is that sadly, CAIR was not the only organization targeted. We also have, for example, in 2010, we have a transcript of a conversation that was held among many Muslim community leaders. And these Muslim community leaders were discussing the controversy over Park 51. As you all may recall, this was also known as the Ground Zero Mosque controversy, when Muslims were planning to expand a community center located several blocks away from the World Trade Center site. The Muslim community got together and held a call to discuss, the danger they were facing and how to address this issue. Mr. Emerson had a mole on that phone call, not from CAIR, from an outside entity, and they were recording that conversation. There were at least a dozen Muslim organizations spied on in that conversation. We've also learned that an external mole, again, not from CAIR, a different mole, was targeting a mosque in the Washington, D.C. area, as well as the African-American Muslim community. We have informed those who were targeted about that so they can do their own investigations and address that mole. Our responsibility, of course, was to investigate the mole within our organization and make sure he was addressed. As we learn more information, we are absolutely going to keep making sure the Muslim community is informed about this so they can address any security risks or any moles in their midst. But we are confident that we have identified all of Mr. Emerson's infiltrators within our organization and successfully secured all of our assets and information, which was never a threat because of the strong security protocols we have. I want to turn it over now to Lena Masri, our Civil Rights and Legal Director and General Counsel.
Before we go to Sister Lena, Brother Nihad Awad, our National Executive Director, is joining us and wanted to say a few words.
Let me turn over then to Brother Nihad Awad, and then we'll go to Lena Masri, our Civil Rights and Legal Director and General Counsel. Brother Nihad, please share with us some remarks on putting this in perspective. And you have to make sure you're unmuted, Nihad.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining the call today. I'm sure I missed the early remarks by Edward, and as you can see, a foreign government using an American organization to spy on an American organization and the American Muslim community should be a red alarm and should be a sign of concern to the government, to American public, and also to any civil rights organization that acts and performs its work under the law and in a legal manner. This has been happening for obviously long time, and it is not only a violation of our privacy and our civil rights and civil liberties as citizens of the country, but it is really a violation of the law. We would like our government, the Department of Justice, and agencies who worry about foreign governments interfering in our lives as Americans, invading our privacy, violating our rights. We would like our government really to take action to protect the American Muslim community against hate groups and foreign governments' interference in our life. The American Muslim community feel the attacks on these hate groups, and we believe that the rising Islamophobia that we feel and our community feels, whether in the workplace, the hate crimes that we see instigated against our community, against mosques, against community centers, have been instigated by similar hate groups, spreading propaganda, paranoia, and fear about minorities, including the American Muslim community. I'm glad and confident that we were able to eliminate and expose one or two moles from our community, but we need the government's help to step in and protect the American Muslim community to practice its First Amendment right to a religious liberty, because these liberties are under attack. We understand that the US government has close ties with the Israeli occupation. No country, no agency, no entity should be above the law. We should put American lives, Americans' liberties above any foreign interest in this country. So we look forward to seeing the media getting engaged in this, to help us fight bigotry against all Americans, including the American Muslim community. I look forward to more comments from my colleagues here who have been handling the situation ever since we learned about it and we exposed it in the past 24 hours. Thank you.
Lena, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Lena Mastri. I am the General Counsel at CAIR National. I'm also an attorney that's representing CAIR Ohio through this process, and I'll talk a bit about both. I was responsible for leading the investigations both at the national level and at the Ohio level. So after my remarks, I'm happy to answer questions about both of those issues. There were a lot of remarks that were said earlier about the documents that we've obtained and giving a much larger context than just the situation of executive director of one of our largest chapters in the country being a mole and sharing information with an anti-Muslim hate group. The much larger context to this is that this anti-Muslim hate group, IPT, or the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and Stephen Emerson, we know, have links to Israeli intelligence, are collaborating with Israeli intelligence, and have consistently, over the years, harassed the Muslim community, harassed Muslim activists, and accused CAIR of being a terrorist organization. So this isn't a typical situation where you have, a director sharing confidential information with just any third party. He's sharing information with a hate group whose very motive is to dismantle and disrupt the work that we do as an organization. So this really struck at the heart of the work that we do. This news was very difficult for everyone across the network, especially at the Ohio office, to even grasp. And I think a lot of us are still processing the extent of the betrayal that was committed by Roman Iqbal. So as you've seen earlier from the presentation that my colleague Edward gave earlier, the earliest evidence that we have spans much more than a decade ago, starting in 2008. The emails and audio and transcripts of the audio are in large part confidential information that are reserved for national level leadership. Private meetings, confidential meetings where we're discussing strategy, policy level discussions. These emails that we received, the audio footage or the audio recordings that we received, the transcripts of the audio that we received, we needed to make sure from the beginning that this information was authentic, that one of our directors was not being framed by an organization like IPT. So we did not take this information at face value. The first time we learned the name Roman Iqbal came earlier this spring, and it was within 2 days that the board at CAIR National authorized myself to lead an investigation, to conduct an investigation into the evidence itself and to authenticate that evidence. And in doing that, we reached out to an expert who is an expert in forensics, in digital forensics, in cybersecurity, in counterintelligence, and in insider threats. This is an expert that has extensive experience, but has worked in the Department of Justice, Department of State, several financial corporations, and a whole list of other organizations that are just too many to mention. There were two motives that we had in engaging this expert. One was to look at the evidence itself and tell us whether this is real, whether he really was sharing this information. And the second was to scan our network our server and make sure that our data is secure, and determine whether there are any other moles that were either working with Roman or not, whether there were any other breaches in our system. That she definitively ruled out. She definitively ruled out the possibility of another mole in the organization based on the activity on the CAIR server. The protocols, it's very advanced security that we have in the system, and there was no breach in the system even with Roman. The issue with Roman was that it was more of a behavioral issue, where if he's recording a meeting with his phone, that's not necessarily something that we would stop, and that doesn't indicate any breach in our systems. Communicating with Emerson through his personal email account, as you saw earlier, this is again something that is not. It doesn't indicate any breach of our system, but that this is a behavioral infiltration, right, where he was providing information on external platforms to IPT. After we had the expert look into the evidence, she told us without a doubt, conclusive evidence, this is 100% authentic. All of the private meetings that were recorded, all of the audio of the private meetings, internal CAIR meetings, were recorded by Roman's devices. There are some public meetings that we obtained audios of that Edward talked about earlier. For example, a Park 51 meeting, those external meetings seem to have been recorded by another device. So Roman was not the only one that was recording, but the internal CAIR meetings were consistently recorded by Roman's devices. After we confirmed definitively that the information was authentic, the next step that we had to do was to put prepare to secure the information, the finances, the assets, everything on both the national level and the CAIR Ohio level. There was a lot of prep work that went into this. There were a lot of people that were involved that we were consulting with privately to make sure that we're covering all our bases. We're talking about someone who has been with CAIR Ohio for a really, really, really long time. And so the systems that he, might have been using at the time at CAIR Ohio are going to obviously evolve over time. We needed to be making sure that we're securing everything. So the prep work that went into securing CAIR Ohio before we even alerted them of the results of our investigation, I would say it took us weeks before we finally met up with members of the CAIR Ohio board, and we briefed them in person. We briefed them. We briefed the board chair on December 5th. We briefed additional board members the following day. Roman was confronted on December 6th. That was the day of the revocation, where we revoked his access to both CAIR National and CAIR Ohio simultaneously at the time of the confrontation by two CAIR Ohio board members. And it was during that confrontation that he admitted to sharing information with IPT and Stephen Emerson. He said that he had explanations, but declined to offer those explanations at the time. Afterwards, when he went back to the CAIR Ohio office to take his things out of the office, he was confronted again at that time by our board chair and our national executive director, Rola Alouche, and Nihad Awad. And he again admitted to them directly that he did in fact share information with Stephen Emerson, that he has explanations. I have been in contact with his attorney. He has an attorney who is a white collar criminal defense attorney. We've been in contact over the course of the last week. He's also essentially said the same thing to me. He was suspended by CAIR Ohio for, I believe, I want to say it was until Tuesday when he was notified of his termination. The CAIR Ohio board voted to terminate him this past Saturday, but he was notified on Tuesday. So during the course of the last week, that was the time period that I was on the ground with CAIR Ohio, working with the staff to just make sure everything was secure, that we were transitioning everything properly. The latest piece of news, and I want to be clear about some things that were revealed, at the time of our announcement. It wasn't until Monday, very late in the evening, that we saw that there was a package that arrived to the office at CAIR Ohio that contained AR-15 replacement parts. And later that evening, we had finally been able to gain access to a credit card. We had secured all of the accounts, but that particular credit card, we were not able to access the portal to see the transactions on that portal, because there was a two-factor authentication that was set up on the portal. The verification code was sent to his cell phone, and so he had to approve access. And for that reason, none of the staff at the CAIR Ohio office at the time of these transactions with gun retailers, ammo retailers, at the time of those transactions, it was confined to a 2-week time period. And it was during that 2-week time period where he changed the password to the account, and the CAIR Ohio staff no longer were able to access the account, and he was the only one who had access. And he did make a payment on the bank statement when it came out. So there was no way for the CAIR Ohio staff, or even myself, I was there on the ground, to see these transactions until we finally were able to obtain access. And all of this information was learned, I believe, around midnight, even the day before we announced this on Tuesday morning. The announcement was advanced because we wanted to alert the community. We cannot say that he was the one who made these transactions. I want to say that and be clear about it, because I want to correct some misinformation that was in the media already. A credit card purchase can be made by anyone. There is no way for us to verify whether he in fact made the purchases, but they happen to coincide at the same time, and he was the only one who had access to the account, and he paid the statement, which would require him to log into the portal. He would see the transactions and pay the statement. We've shared this information with local police. They have opened an investigation. We've been in contact with the FBI. All options right now are on the table in terms of options that we may pursue, both on the national and Ohio level. So that's all from me. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Yes, and if anybody has a question, could they put it in the chat, and I'll take it in the order and received and indicate who you would like to answer the question.
Ibrahim, if you want, they could also, there's a way on Zoom to raise your hand.
Raise your hand too, if you want. Where Edward is being asked, how did you get the documents? I think he addressed that, but he can address it again, perhaps.
So yeah, obviously we want to make sure that we protect our sources or source. We don't want to put anyone in danger, physical, legal, or otherwise. So we're not revealing publicly right now how we receive the information. I will say it was not solicited on our part. We were not looking for it. It came to us out of the blue, unsolicited. We then investigated the information, vetted it, turned it over to a professional investigator, as Ms. Masri noted, and then acted once the evidence had been confirmed. But we are not right now publicly saying where we got it from. I think you can, I will just say this though. It is very clear that the way Mr. Emerson treated his staff, the abusive behavior towards his staff, has made him vulnerable. When people are abused in that way, when people feel like they are acting not in the best interest of America, but in the interest of foreign government, and it's very likely those people might start to speak up and share that information with the public so that that issue can be addressed. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, and another question is, will this independent report be available to us in full? And what firm conducted this investigation?
So Lena,
Yes, the report is an attorney-client privileged report that was prepared for the purpose of advising myself as general counsel, to advise the board of CAIR National. At this time, we have not decided whether we're going to make this report publicly available, but as of now, it is confidential, so we would not be able to share that report. I can share the name of the expert. It's Christy Horton of Horton Innovations.
Spelling of Christie.
Kristi, Horton, Horton Innovations.
and I'll add one thing. You know, the report obviously goes through great detail in verifying the evidence, but the nice thing we have here is that Roman Iqbal and Stephen Emerson are not disputing what we're alleging, right? That's the important point to make here. We have publicly accused this man of abusing his staff, working with the foreign government, and spying on us, and neither Mr. Iqbal nor Mr. Emerson have denied these claims. And in fact, as Ms. Masri, I believe, noted, Mr. Iqbal admitted when confronted that he had indeed worked with Stephen Emerson. So that's another reason why we don't feel it's necessary to release the full report. It has been admitted to that the allegation is true, that he was acting as a spy. But obviously, Ms. Masri will be considering whether or not we can release that in the future.
Next question, was Roman Iqbal always a mole, or was he turned by IPT?
So we can't speak to his motive, and we can't, you would have to ask Mr. Iqbal. What we can say definitively, though, is that he was doing this for over 10 years, while at the same time he was representing clients and fulfilling those obligations. He was simultaneously betraying the organization, the broader community trust, for over 10 years. Whether or not he planned to do that from the very beginning, what his motive was, why he did it, we would direct you to Mr. Iqbal to ask that question.
I will add to that, this is a question that the forensic expert perspective may be able to shed some light into this. Like we said earlier, the first emails that we have are from 2008. He started in 2006, I believe. From the forensic expert's perspective, the patterns that he exhibited in forwarding the information, the type of information, the regularity of forwarding the information to his personal email accounts persisted from before 2008 and continued until the time that we, the last that we spoke with her. So I would say as of just a few months ago.
Next question, Lena said Iqbal paid the credit card statements. Does that include the bill that had the weapons parts purchases?
Ibrahim, you
Yes.
skipped the question, just FYI, but go ahead, Lena, and then we can go to the one we missed.
Oh,
yes. So the transactions, so when they were being made, they could not be seen by the CAIR Ohio staff because they couldn't access the portal. Then after the transactions were made, the statement was released and he did make that payment. And again, the statement itself was also only accessible on the portal.
Another question, was CAIR in physical danger, and what is the theory of the AR-15 parts purchase?
Ibrahim, hold on. The question you missed was, how did you get the information from his personal emails in his device?
I think you covered that already. Didn't you cover that? That was another question.
How did we get the information from his personal emails in his device? Was that asked?
I thought an earlier version of it was asked.
Just to make sure, we did not get information from his personal devices. What Mr. Iqbal was doing was recording conversations and sending CAIR emails to this hate group. And then we got the information after it had been sent to the hate group. So it was not taken from Mr. Iqbal. Obviously, we wouldn't do that, of course. It was given to the hate group, and from the hate group, it made its way eventually to us. So I just want to clarify, we did not take anything from Mr. Iqbal's devices. In terms of his email, all CAIR employees, we have an email server. After we found out the evidence he was a mole, as Ms. Masri noted, we were able to check our email server and notice this pattern of him sending work emails to his personal email account. And that was a red flag for us and evidence that he was indeed the one doing this. But beyond that, nothing was taken or retrieved from his devices.
I
And-
also, if I can clarify just one thing, based on the last piece of information, because Roman is an attorney, of course, we were very careful to do a very targeted search of his email account. So to preserve the attorney-client confidentiality. So none of that was looked at. We were just doing a targeted search from the back end on the server.
Another question, what other organizations were there moles in, and how many moles was IPT working with?
We have identified, so in terms of organizations that were spied on, and I don't mean infiltrated with a spy, but I mean a spy getting access to conversations they were having with the community. It was, I believe, at least a dozen organizations that we know of were spied upon around the 2010 area. Since then, about the same and perhaps more. So I would say we don't know everything. We can't know for sure exactly everything IPT was doing, but based on the evidence we have, I would say easily that over a dozen Muslim organizations and mosques were targeted. But in terms of that being actually infiltrated with a mole, not that many. Not that many were actually infiltrated. We believe that in the range of, that we can say for sure definitively that question, in the range of 3. And in terms of moles, we believe we've identified 3 moles, 2 of them by name. And again, we've alerted the organizations that were targeted about that second mole. The third mole, we're still working on figuring out who that was, but that is not a member of CAIR. But we are working to identify and uncover that and share that information with whoever needs it.
Right. The next question, you are revealing internal communications of IPT, presumably leaked to you from someone. At the same time, you fired a CAIR employee for revealing your internal communications to IPT. Could you address how these 2 scenarios are different?
Sure. So if an organization, for example, asks a mole within an organization to violate their employment contract, to violate their ethics as an attorney, to secretly record conversations without permission, which is a legal violation in many states, that is spying. That is an intrusion. That is a breach of all sorts of ethical, professional, and maybe even legal duties. On the other hand, you all as journalists would know that hypothetically speaking, if a source decides to give you information that you didn't ask for, they decide to say, hey, there's wrongdoing going on, here's proof of it, you didn't ask for it, you had no role in securing it, that is a completely different situation, right? It's the question whether or not, in other words, you are spying and hacking someone to get information, or whether or not someone who has the right to that information decides to give it to you voluntarily without being asked. So they are 2 completely different situations. I'll give you one analogy. So we know right now that our government is attempting to prosecute Julian Assange, and their allegation is that Mr. Assange did not merely receive information from Private Manning, right, which is not a crime. If Private Manning had simply given the New York Times the videotapes and the stuff that he took, the New York Times did not commit any crime, did not do anything wrong at all. If, on the other hand, the New York Times gave Private Manning the technology, the recording equipment, the other materials needed to hack the government, then the New York Times is potentially engaged in obviously a legal violation. So those are 2 completely different scenarios, not the same thing at all. CAIR is a civil rights organization. We uphold the highest standard of ethics. I will note that we have information we've been given about Mr. Emerson's organization that is, to be honest, humiliating and embarrassing, and we're not sharing that. We don't think that that is relevant to the work, the issue at hand. And so we're not releasing that information because we're Muslims and we believe in doing right to people, even if they are unjust to us. So I would just note that.
We're coming up to the 1 hour mark, so we'll hope to finish quickly here. The next question is about what other groups, so I think that's redundant. So we'll go to that.
To note, Ibrahim, on that, the reason we're not identifying the other groups that were targeted is that it's their, they have to make the decision about how to address an intrusion, how to, and what they want to share. It's not for us to go and put their name out there. But I will say that, we are very confident that the groups that we know of that were targeted, they're aware of it, they've addressed the problem, and are not in any continuing risk of intrusion.
All right. Next question, were membership lists or other personal information of CAIR members compromised beyond the policy strategy information you mentioned?
So CAIR is not like the NAACP. So you know how the NAACP has members? I was a card carrying member of the NAACP as a young boy, right? So CAIR does not have membership in that way. The only members of CAIR are employees at our offices across the country. And so that information is publicly available. If you want to know who works for CAIR, just go to a CAIR website. So we don't have any indication that Mr. Iqbal was sending that information. It would not be necessary to use a spy to do that. It's publicly available. And I want to emphasize no information, no evidence whatsoever of any compromising of donor information, of anything like that at all. And Mr. Iqbal did not have access to any of that information outside of his local office. Our organization has a lot of strong security protocols. The offices operate separately, and so no sort of breaches or intrusions or sharing of that kind of information.
One additional thing is we also did not see any evidence of a sharing of client information either.
Correct.
If anybody has any other questions that haven't been answered, we can do it offline and just contact us directly. Last question, what is the FBI and other law enforcement agencies doing or saying, especially about the gun purchases and the rifle parts in a package?
I can answer that. So, and I'm going to tie this into, I thought I heard a question earlier about whether there is a safety risk for the staff in the office, if I'm recalling that question correctly. There definitely is a significant concern in the office on the ground in CAIR, Ohio. They did, work there a bit this week while there was police presence. They're no longer working in the office because of the concerns. As I said from the beginning, we're talking about a hate group that has consistently accused us of being a terrorist organization. So sharing confidential information with that group in and of itself presents a safety concern to CAIR, Ohio, its staff, its volunteers, affiliates, their staff and volunteers across the country. We reached out to Hilliard Police. They came out to the office a couple of times and opened an investigation. The FBI, until now, there's been some communication with the FBI, but nothing significant that I can update at this time, but I am in contact with the FBI regarding this as well.
All right, well, thank you very much for
Looks like there are
participating.
just two more questions. I don't mind if we stay a little longer just to take the last two.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. CAIR, the last two that I see, CAIR filed a libel lawsuit against an IPT employee in Maryland. Federal court. Was discovery in that case the source of any of this information?
It was not, no. That is a lawsuit that our national office is involved in with CAIR New York. That is not any of the information that we relied on for this.
And the last question we have listed. I know you say you can't speak to Iqbal's motive, but can you address the quote rumors that he may have been blackmailed by Emerson or IPT?
What I will say is that we have not uncovered any evidence of that. I cannot confirm or deny that because I don't have, nor do any of us have any direct knowledge of that. But what I will say definitively is that he has been doing this consistently since 2008, and more likely than not, earlier than that. There has been no change in terms of what the expert has told us. There has been no change regarding his habits and practices throughout the entire time that he was with us at CAIR, Ohio, and meeting with us at CAIR. That's all we can provide at this time.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Speak now. Somebody says, could it have been a financial incentive?
We have no indication of any incentive. I think any discussion about the reasons why he did this is speculation, and my guess is as good as yours.
But we encourage you to ask him.
Yeah.
And so I don't see any further questions. So again, thank you all for joining us. If you come up with other questions later, just shoot us an email and we'll be glad to respond. Again, thank you for coming.